And now a brief video on Ugarit, the Ugaritic civilization. These are the people that the ancient Hebrew people called the Canaanites. And if you have taken a look at the Old Testament, at the Hebrew Bible, then you've come across that term Canaanites, certainly in the books of Joshua and Judges. We didn't know much about the Canaanites, about the Ugarites, until the discovery of a Ugaritic city near what's called Ras Shamra in northern Syria today. The Canaanites, the Ugarites, lived along the western side of the Levant, very close to the Mediterranean Sea. Ugarit was uncovered by archaeologists just a few years after the end of World War II. And once we were able to decipher the language, then the written language, then we learned an awful lot about the context in which much of the early Old Testament takes place. The Ugarites were a civilized people, as you can see here from the ruins of the city called Ugarit. We call the whole civilization after the name of the city that we first uncovered from that civilization. As you may pick up on, that's fairly common to refer to an entire civilization by just the first city that we uncover. But they were a civilized people. They lived in cities. They had a written language. Here we see some Canaanite writing, some Ugaritic writing. These are cuneiform because the Ugarites adopted Sumerian cuneiform just like everybody else in this part of the world did, or almost everybody else in this part of the world did. And here a closer view of some Ugaritic cuneiform. Pausing just to let you look at it. You can see how it might be made with a stylus, with kind of a triangular-headed, flathead screwdriver kind of looking thing. And here, just so you can see, Ugaritic was a phonetic alphabet, like Sumerian was. And you can maybe see how you use your little chisel-shaped stylus to make these marks into clay tablet or into stone. Probably one of the most interesting things we learned from Ras Shamra, the first city that we uncovered, Ugarit, was about the Ugaritic gods. The chief of the gods was named El. El is just a Semitic word that we translated as God. El in Ugaritic language or in Ugaritic religion was the creator god, the original god, the most powerful of the gods. El, again, is just the Semitic word that means God. It shows up in the Arabic word Allah, El, Allah in Arabic. It's used in Hebrew to refer to God, both as El and as Elohim, the plural form of El, although it always takes a singular verb, which is interesting. El in the Ugaritic religion now has a wife named Asherah. She's the goddess of fertility. You may be able to make out she has wheat in her hand. I'm trying to think of the word, heads of wheat in her hands that she's shaking around there. Fertility goddesses, and they're almost always goddesses, usually refer to both human fertility in the sense of conceiving children, and also fertility in the sense of agriculture, of growing crops. Asherah was worshipped with large poles placed in the ground. If you read some of the prophetic literature in the Old Testament, you will learn about the poles of Asherah, or Astar. She's often called in the Hebrew Bible. And there are references to these poles and sacred trees in the books of Joshua and Judges. If you read the Old Testament, in the early parts of the Old Testament, you'll hear references to Baal. You came across that word Baal when we talked about the Sumerians, and the Ugarites used that word Baal to refer to their gods. When the Old Testament refers to Baal, it's usually referring to this Baal, Baal-Hadad, who is the god of thunder and storms and lightning bolts and fire. And that's this guy here. Well, from our viewpoint, perhaps, as 21st century Americans, the most horrible of the Ugaritic gods was a god named Moloch. We find child sacrifice all over the Mesopotamian world, cultural Mesopotamian world. And but the Ugarites practiced it more extensively than anywhere else that we find. When we find Ugaritic homes, almost always, right across the threshold, the place where you enter the home through the door, underneath the stone, that is the threshold of the home where the doorway is, the bottom part of the doorway, we'll find the skeleton of an infant who's been sacrificed and then buried under the entranceway, so that when the gods enter the home, we'll know that the family has already sacrificed a child to the gods, and maybe the gods won't be so mean to them. Moloch was a bronze. It's been long since destroyed. In my opinion, that's one we can do without. But was a bronze statue with arms. Let me back up a little bit. With arms outstretched like this. From the descriptions we have, he was sitting down. He had a very hot fire in his lap, and the live child would be taken, and the father would take the child, throw the child through the arms of Moloch, give the child to Moloch, and the baby would fall into the fire. I was talking about this one time, and a young woman student said was horrified by this, of course. And she said, why didn't they love their children? And I had to say, well, of course they loved their children. That's the whole idea behind sacrifice. Sacrifice means you give up something that you love. Of course they loved their children. That's what adds to the horror that we find in the scene. Of course they loved their children. That's why the gods, in their mindset, demanded them. Because they loved them. That's the whole point of sacrifice. If you give up something you don't love, then that's not a sacrifice. Kind of a down place to end a discussion of Ugaritic civilization. But that's a quick view of a civilization that's going to be discussed in a presentation you're going to be seeing on the collapse of the Bronze Ages. So I want you to know a little bit about the Ugaritic people.